Hey there, welcome to another episode of my show. Today I'm going to talk about a follow-up to an earlier episode of VR and how it's going to affect basically filmmaking and, you know, what you're going to see within the VR experience, potentially. And the area I'm going to talk about a little bit is how they're actually going to use like digital video, because that's what the medium's going to be, because digital video is 60 frames a second. That's what VR specs are for games, and I suspect it'll end up being the same way for video and filmmaking, things like that. If you're going to do a VR experience, just to have good specs for what you're doing, because 24 frames per second is perfect for cinema, but it's not good for anything that's tied to digital and expanding it too much. And already there's been a lot of improvements and expansions towards 60 frames per second or 50 frames per second in the past few years. You've seen The Hobbit shot, I think it's 50 frames a second to shoot The Hobbit, and maybe it was 60. James Cameron's going to shoot Avatar in the same. There's lots of controversy because they say this is the end of cinema, but it's actually the technology is moving forward, and there are massive limitations to this. I mean, there's potentially real problems for movies by doing this. I mean, the main thing is 24 frames a second. It creates a fiction for our eyes accept as reality in a movie, basically. It's not reality, it's lenses, it's light, but it creates an illusion of reality or an illusion of fantasy that your brain can accept. But you're accepting something that's false, but you're saying that's my view of what reality should be in the cinema screen. It's not proper reality, it's just agreed upon why that's what reality is to us, so we can emotionally engage in this fiction. But it's not reality at all, obviously. But that's a whole generation's come up with that. Generations have come up with that. I mean, I grew up with that. When I first saw some video images, I thought, that just doesn't look right, it's wrong, it's awful. But as you see them more often, and you see them used for good effect for like something like sport, you can see their uses. I mean, a lot of YouTube videos are now pretty much they're 720s, they're not that yet, but they will be eventually. Some already are. A lot of video rendering goes towards 1080p and 60 frames, or it's going that way. I mean, your TV goes to that now. Mine is automatically 60 frames per second, 60 hertz or whatever. I mean, that's just the way it goes, because that's the way the medium's going. And it's actually fine for certain things and bad for other things. I mean, the big problem for filming people is the 60 frames per second makes everything look like a TV show. Like, a lot of the things that filmmaking did was hiding lots of limitations by trickery. And when you see it in 60 frames per second, you can see the trickery quite simply. I mean, if you look at something like one of the Star Wars prequels, if you look at it 24 frames per second, it's obviously CGI, but it doesn't look too fake. It's so in reality. You watch it at 60 frames per second, you actually see the joins of where one image has gone to the other image. You see something in 3D, but it's hard to get 3D in 60 frames just now because these are limited to 24 frames per second. But if you're using like the settings that normally go to the normal settings of TV now, you can see a lot of the fakery of the effects. If you see it in 3D, you can see the layers of images quite obviously. And there's other stuff. If you watch something that's got a set, sometimes if you look at something like the new King Kong, the Peter Jackson King Kong, you can see the set. If you look at 60 frames, you can see the set very obviously as a set. But what it does do, because it's linked to computer graphics and gaming and things like that, is the actual CGI looks a lot better, because the 60 frames a second, the detail is much more sharp. You can see the imagery, you can see the character of the models a lot better. It's clearer, it's a clearer world, it's much simpler to understand where you're going. So that's a good thing, is if you're creating this world there is potential to do some interesting stuff with it, but it just means the actual live action just looks fake. It just, you can see the joins all over the place. It's really difficult, and it's like, well, how do you get around this when, if you're doing something like VR where you need to do an immersive world, you're going to have to cheat if you're going to use a fantasy with someone in reality, a real person, mixed with all this fakery. I mean, that's what they're doing with stuff like the Zemeckis films like Beowulf and Christmas Carol. Like, how do you meld that? I mean, they weren't always successful, but I quite liked a lot of them. They were, you can see you join interesting shots with people, actors, where they used CGI as makeup rather than normal makeup, because normal makeup will look fake in this new medium. So it was trying to solve some of those problems, but I mean, it's not really there yet. I mean, it's potentially disastrous if you don't spend the money to get it right. I mean, it could potentially be really bad. I mean, if you look at even like some recent films like Jupiter Ascending, if you see that with in 3D with the more modern settings, which are more aimed towards digital, you can see the layers of foreground and background, and they don't join at all. So it's but if you see it in like the 24 frames per second old school filmmaking element, it looks fine for what it is. It's a fantasy world. I mean, something the other one, the Speed Racer, is actually one of the more successful ones, and this is Speed Racer is an important thing because they used very vibrant colours, and if you use vibrant colours in video, because video seems to soak up a lot of imagery, it makes everything look flat because it soaks everything up and naturalises it to a way that I doesn't quite let it makes it look too mundane. Basically, something like Speed Racer with all those the imagery is really oversaturated. That looks a lot more realistic and a lot more suitable because it soaks out the excess and it actually makes it feel like it's a world where you've got the CGI and the humans, and there's less of a problem because they're banging up against each other. Because it's been so stylized, it actually feels much more naturalistic in like the more digital settings. And I think that's the big thing about where it's got to go in the future, at least for a while, until, I mean, we're still really in the 2K era where it's 1080p. I mean, you get 4K TVs, but that's not, I mean, some computer people use 4K, but most people don't. There's talk about 8K TVs eventually. That's way off. I'm sure when they come in, those kind of cameras for them, plus the VR cameras, when that gets more built up, people will do more nuance. It'll take away from some of that element that sucks the life out of the imagery for live action. You know, I think it'll be more nuanced and people will get more interesting images of live action that can join together well with like CGI, because CGI looks a lot better in 60 frames per second, and the world looks more complete in 60 frames per second. It's just more detailed. If you ever look at a video game and you actually see its proper high settings, it looks a lot, I mean, it's still obviously fake, but it looks a lot more like a proper world. It's a fantasy world, but it's a proper world, and there's movement. If you look at a film with 60 frames per second that's done a lot of CGI, the actual world seems much more complete if it's a newer film. An older film you can see joined, but a newer one you won't as much. But it's complicated to how do you join these two very different worlds that actually have very different needs. Like reality with special effects, it needs all the help you can get. The film and special effects needs all the help you can get. Digital needs CGI because it's based on animation, and it's that futuristic animation that's designed for computers and for basic TVs. So I think in the short term, the best way to go if you're going to actually if you're going to really go for like 60 frames per second like Avatar is going to do, or Avatar 2, I think the big thing to do is just oversaturate the colours. When that's what you look at Avatar, you can see it looks very bright a lot of the time. That's because they're using a lot of digital, but it actually makes it a lot easier to meld the filmmaking and the live action or the animation of the people, the actors who are actually doing the performances. It makes it much easier. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that while they're working out the technology and advancing it, is because that what would be a hyper stylized world is the easiest thing to make naturalistic. It's sort of like in with effects, it's much easier to fake stuff at night where your eye can't look at stuff so clearly. Like a monster looks better at night than it ever would in the day because you'll split the fakery. I think in this, a lot of light helps meld the world a lot easier to avoid seeing the fakery, or a lot of darkness, but darkness doesn't really work so well. With digital, I think it tends to be black and more black and more black. So, I mean, this has happened before. If you look at colour film when it first came in, you need a lot of lighting really to, for the actual, when you first started just photography, you needed a lot of light because the chemical composition of the film at the time needed a lot of light just to get the image. So even when first started filmmaking, you needed lots of lights to create an image for the film. And even when it went to colour, you needed lots of lights. So for the first like 20 years of colour photography and filmmaking, they were very saturated, tons of lighting. They actually created style to suit the limitations of technology. I think this is going to happen here again, is we're going to create a style that will cover the technology while they're still working it out, so you can actually create a reality for the people to accept for now. Because if you look at any art forms, there's always, the reality is always what suits the time, and it changes as people see the fakeness of it or someone else comes up they're more interested in. I think for now we need to find a sort of agreed upon reality for like VR, if you're going to combine people with CG. I mean, even when you look at VR, you're doing like an event or naturalism basically, you're probably going to need lights so that the imagery looks good to the people. It doesn't look like it's just bland. I mean, 3D it'll look decent because it'll be the new thing. But I think you'll probably need a lot of lighting just to create vibrancy of what you're watching, so it feels like it's something that's going to be interesting. I mean, if you're doing basic video, you're in an office and you're people talking, you put lots of lights on and talk. If you're doing a basic thing like that, which they've done already in some channels, YouTube channels have already done that, that won't be a problem because it's a very basic setup, but you don't need lighting that's too complicated. But you need lighting for combining like different sorts of images together. You're going to need to actually, I think, invest more in lighting to create the meld at the moment, because 3D exposes a lot, digital exposes a lot. You could see a lot of fake CGI stuff if you go towards the VR world for a while, if they don't work it out carefully. I could be wrong here. I mean, I'm looking at images, how they come across as you watch them through different contexts, and I'm looking at the historical context of what happened in the past. But it's fairly obvious when you look through the filter of like 60 frames at the moment towards a CGI environment, it can look very fake and very alienating, because I mean, people hated 60 frames for The Hobbit. They just felt it was really fake and just pulled them out of it. And one of the settings I've tried, my TV is Panasonic, and they've got a dynamic range, which is everything's busted out a bit more from the normal settings. The normal settings, you look at anything with CGI, it does not look right. It just looks off. Obviously, actual live action, anything with computers looks fine, but in live action it just looks off. But when you go to dynamic, which is everything gets blasted out a bit more, everything melds a lot better because the fakery is gone. That's one of the elements, plus what have historically happened in the past with basic filmmaking, is creating something out of the limitations of what you've got. And what you've got at the moment is quite a few different planes of imagery that doesn't have the protection of film, which actually hides a lot of sins. It's been one of the tricks for the last 100 years, is they can use chemicals of film to hide things, and you only really notice it later when a new technology comes along, that's why you always look at it and say, why does that effect look wrong now? Because some of it's just age in your eyes, much more critical, but sometimes it's fact is going from like film to video or to DVD, and like some of the DVD didn't have much depth to it, so a lot of films effects looked a lot more faker in DVD, because it was first level of digital really, but it didn't have that much detail, so you just get the basic image. It was a very flat image. Something like Blu-ray now, you get a lot more depth to the image, so things that looked really fake in DVD, just like something like Evil Dead, looks aged now, but if you look at it in Blu-ray, it looks a lot better because there's more depth to the image, so you can see the context of what they were trying to do at the time, because they were beginning to film, and films got a lot more depth to the image, so there's certain tricks they could do that your eye would kind of half spot when you're watching it in film, that if we saw it in the flat DVD image, it would obviously see the trick. But if you see it with our image more depth, you won't see a trick as much because it's been set up for those limitations. So that's the big thing with effects generally, it's always getting around limitations. Those limitations change, the technology changes, and one trick you've done before suddenly looks fake if you put it in another medium. And that's just the nature of effects. I mean, it's one of the reasons I like looking at old effects is because, yeah, they don't look the way they would have looked before, but you actually see a different sort of craftsmanship to them, and they're trying to do something different. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's just an add-on to what I've talked about before.